Hi, my name is Reed Silverne. The name of this show is Fed Pride. The reason it's called Fed Pride is because I'm a federal worker and proud of it. Okay, we're going to get both me and my logo on sooner or later. And that, of course, is the beauty of this show and the beauty of this venue. This is public access, direct dialogue, and what that means is I am live to tape, and anything that I do is actually you are going to see, except that I'm going to do it today, which for me is Friday. For you is either Sunday or Tuesday, Sunday at 1 o'clock or Tuesday at 7, depending on what channel you're watching. And if I fall off the chair, I fall off the chair, and if I accidentally disappear myself from the screen, which I just did, you will see that on Sunday or Tuesday. I'm going to talk about a couple things today, and of course amazing, incredible things have happened. There's a big scandal about the national intelligence estimate that's come out that basically they're saying that Iran has stopped developing nuclear weapons in 2003, and that a lot of the saber rattling that's been going on is exactly saber rattling. Whether that's true or not, however, the National Intelligence Estimate is actually put out by the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, and for some reason it was leaked out. I'm not sure. Apparently this was an unclassified version. And the UN says, yeah, that's true, but they're worried about uranium enrichment. In fact, there's two sets of very, very light sanctions against Iran right now that doesn't seem to be hurting them much. And in reaction, Russia's Putin and the Chinese have definitely said, we're not going to support any further sanctions. We're not going to hurt our allies and our buddies over there in Iran. Whether Iran, the Israelis think that Iran is going to develop nuclear bombs in 2 to 3 years and then nuke them. Hopefully that's not true. And apparently our own intelligence, our CIA and our Director of National Intelligence, doesn't think that they're developing an outright weapon. However, developing nuclear fuel through these centrifuges, and basically how that works is U-238 is the normal isotope for uranium. That's what you find in yellow cake. But there's a little tiny bit of U-235, which is what you make nuclear bombs out of, or atom bombs. And this U-235 can be isolated by basically turning the uranium into a gas, turning them in very, very, very quick and highly engineered centrifuges. And these centrifuges turn literally tens of thousands of times a minute, and consequently have to be perfectly balanced. They're not perfectly balanced. They just go flying off. They break all the other ones, and everybody has to start over. Now, the Iranians claim that they have 3,000 of these. Apparently, according to some sources that I've read about, it takes about 60,000 to make a real effective, let's make bomb after bomb. However, it is possible to take the slightly enriched gas and run it through the same 3,000 again, then run it through the same 3,000 centrifuges again, then do it over and over and over again until you get it highly enriched. Basically, if it's enriched to 5% to 85%, it can be good for producing nuclear energy. But if it's 85% or more, boy, you put it together. You put it in a circle that pushes it together perfectly, and you got yourself a bomb. So I hope they're not trying to make one. According to the National Intelligence Estimate, they're not, or at least they stopped in 2003. They were, and then they stopped. I personally don't know, and I'm glad I don't know, because I am the proud, never having seen anything classified in my whole life. And I don't intend to ever see anything classified, and I hope nobody shows me anything classified, because I don't want to know. The things I don't know, I don't want to know. So that's basically what that thing is all about. And it's hard to say what the truth is. Clearly, the Israelis are worried about him. because their president just got up on TV and said, we want to wipe Israel off the map. So the Israelis are probably more worried about it than anybody else. And they sponsor a guerrilla group, I'm going to show you right here, called Hezbollah, which is right over in Lebanon. And until a latest war in the Middle East, let's see if we can focus in a little bit. Till the latest war in the Middle East, they were right on the border of Israel and shelling Israel on a pretty regular basis. Since that war, they've been kicked off of that border, and they're up about 20 miles. Let's see if we can get a border out of it. I'm not sure what my Google Earth is doing to me today. So they're clearly worried. But one of the themes of this show lately, although it's Fed Pride, and I am proud to be a federal worker, but I've gotten very interested in foreign policy and military policy and the alignment of powers throughout the world. And basically my number one worry is right now there's Moscow, Russia, and there was an election in Russia and an election in my other bête noire, which of course is Venezuela, right over here. There's Venezuela, that's run by Hugo Chavez, produces, they say, 3.3 million barrels a day. OPEC says they only produce 2.4 million barrels a day, of which 1.4 million goes to the United States and is distributed by Citgo Oil, which is owned by the Venezuelan government and controlled directly by Mr. Chavez. He had an election too. First, let's talk a little bit about what's going on in Russia. There's been a run-up to a parliamentary election in Russia. Russia is no longer communist. It's not the Soviet Union. I've mentioned in this show before that I personally have been to Russia. I used to work in Europe, and see if I can find it again. I used to work in Europe, and part of my job was going to Moscow and doing work there. So I've been there for about a total of 8 weeks, 4 different times. And I was there during a period when the Russians were relatively neutral about Americans, not totally hostile. Since then, Putin in the last couple of years, he had what he would call the Munich Declaration, in which case, for all intents and purposes, in my opinion, he virtually declared a new Cold War against the West. He was reacting against this set of countries joining NATO, the Baltic countries, which were part of the Soviet Union proper, Poland, Czech, Slovakia, Hungary, literally joined NATO, and NATO, of course, is an alliance with America, an alliance that was facing and definitely aimed against what had been the Soviet Union. NATO still exists, the Warsaw Pact doesn't, and many of the Eastern European countries, which are still very, very afraid of Russia, have joined NATO, and some of them have joined the EU, which is the European Union, which is an incredible agglomeration of economies that is now, with the dollar falling and the euro going up, the largest economy in the world, bigger than the United States. It's hard to say what it is because I haven't seen the figures, but if you consider that the United States had an economy about 13 trillion and Europe was about equal when the dollar was pretty much a little bit below the euro, European economy is probably now worth 15 to 16 trillion dollars. We're bigger than America, which is still probably now worth about 13 trillion. So, and I've been to a lot of these countries. I haven't been to Poland particularly, but I've been to Czech, I've been to Hungary, and they have joined the EU. They haven't adopted the euro quite yet, but they've joined the EU, and if you have euros in your pocket, they'll let you spend them there. And Poland, of course, is now getting to be one of the big economies in Europe. Unfortunately, or fortunately, the Europeans were trying to wean themselves from dependence on Middle Eastern oil and from Saudi Arabia and the Middle East, which of course is so unstable. So the Europeans paid the Russians which, by the way, have the largest oil reserves, the second largest gas reserves, but of those second largest gas reserves, the most plugged in, basically pulling them up and putting them on very, very large pipelines and piping this natural gas to Europe. Europeans love natural gas because it is the cleanest, short of nuclear plants, form of electricity generating power. It basically produces very, very little, what are they called, carbon, greenhouse gases. So Russia has these very, very long and complex pipelines. They have oil pipelines that go through Belarus and Poland to Germany, other pipelines that go through the Ukraine, that go down to Hungary and then on to Italy and so on and so forth. We, and I've done shows about this, tried to get Russia's old satellite, or part of the Soviet Union, Kazakhstan, which also has a lot of oil and natural gas, to run their pipeline over the Caspian, and we already have financed a pipeline from Azerbaijan, which has lots of oil and lots of gas, through Georgia, down to Turkey, and then to a port right down here in Turkey to the Mediterranean. So the Russians actually signed a document with the Kazakhstan government, basically trying to create Kazakhstan as a adjunct and a satellite of Russia, to ship their oil through pipelines to the Volga region and then into the pipeline that goes through the Ukraine. So basically the Russians have just won the battle of energy to get Europe very, very much dependent on Russia. So now Russia is making 100 billion euros a year in just pure, utter foreign reserves, complete total profit, and that is equal to $150 billion. And with that $150 billion, the Russians are now the third largest holders of foreign currency after China and I believe Japan. I don't really know what the second one is, because they have a tremendous favorable trade balance with Europe because they ship oil. Europe just ships pure money. So I've been to Moscow. It's full of fancy nightclubs and millionaires with armored limousines and pretty girls on their hips and so on and so forth. And that was a few years ago. I can imagine what it's like now. But now that Putin has consolidated power, turned Russia into basically an authoritarian government, basically there's probably, for foreigners who live in Moscow now, an FSB agent assigned to follow on them around and, if necessary, to entrap them or do something to them if they get out of line. So Russia and our own State Department will dispute me on this, but they have gone back to the Cold War. They've launched long-range bomber planes that fly the entire throughout the entire Earth. They've run sorties of bombers to England and to Norway, both of which are NATO countries, to test our defenses. And now they've just announced that they're going to dispatch a fleet of an aircraft carrier group, 11 ships, to the Mediterranean so that Russia can fly the flag in the Mediterranean. So they're definitely going back to their old ways, and they supply arms to Iran and arms to Hugo Chavez and to Chavez's allies. Not just Cuba, but also the other allies that Chavez is trying to develop around Latin America. So what does this mean? Well, the United Russia Party, they just had an election for parliament in Russia. Russia is basically a presidential system. President has tremendous power. It's like our president does, but there's still a legislature and there's still a Supreme Court over there. And they have what these they call oblasts and some other district, I forgot what those are called, they're smaller than oblasts, which are the equivalent of states and provinces with their own governors. Now, a while ago, Putin basically took over all the equivalent of the state governments throughout Russia and set it up so that the Kremlin, in other words, whoever runs the government of Russia in the Kremlin, which are the official buildings in downtown Moscow, can appoint these governors throughout all of Russia. Plus, he's taken over the oil industry and threw the heads of the two heads of the largest oil company in Russia in jail, and had the state-owned natural gas industry named Gazprom to take over the oil industry, and he's taken over Mediamost, which was the independent media, and also had Gazprom take that over as well, so that the Russian government owns the media, owns the oil industry. They already own the gas industry. They never privatized that. And also the mining industry, and I forgot what that was called, but it was nickel something or other. A lot of the oligarchs have been kicked out, and they've been replaced by the government owning these major industries. So basically, none of the other parties can get their word out, and United Russia, which is Putin's own party, basically runs the show. They run all the media. So they've had this election. Basically, they rounded up a lot of the opposition figures, including jailed twice Kasparov, who's a world's greatest chess player, who was running in one of the parties. And any demonstration or gathering of the opposition parties, except for the communists, who were kind of semi-official fellow travelers, were rounded up, often thrown in jail, and so on and so forth. Other than that, it was free. So they had an election, and there were reports of fraud, but they probably didn't need to defraud anybody because A, Putin is popular, B, he's brought, I guess, pride back to the Russians. They're a great power again. And C, the economy is much, much better now that Russia has basically gotten this tremendous positive trade deficit with Europe. Just awash in money. The regular people don't necessarily participate in it, but the wealthy people are just extremely wealthy. And there's a lot of people who are working jobs serving these wealthy people, restaurants and so on and so forth. So the economy is much better than it was. 1998, the ruble collapsed. Now the ruble is basically tied to the euro, no longer to the dollar. So basically, Putin cannot run again. The only way he can run again is to call a state of emergency like the Musharraf did in Pakistan, suspend the Constitution, and then declare himself president for life. He's not quite ready to do that. So what is going to happen? The prime minister was removed a little bit before the election, a few months ago. I talked to this on the show, and replaced with a non-entity named Zhukov. And Zhukov was somebody who was in the St. Petersburg is up here, government when Putin was the mayor of St. Petersburg. I guess it was his security chief. The two deputy prime ministers were Medvedev and I believe Ivanov, were the two guys who were competing, forming factions within the party to run for president. They've been pushed aside. So basically there's a prime minister and two deputy prime ministers, and up on top is Putin, but Putin can't run again. So they don't know whether Putin is going to fire the prime minister now that United Russia has 70% of the seats in parliament. There's only two sitting parties that got over the 7% vote that are sitting in parliament, the communists and United Russia, and almost all of the parliamentary members MPs or whatever they call them there in Russia are members of Putin's party. So Putin just aced these elections. One was 63%, and the question is he going to run the government the way the communists did, where the chairman of the Communist Party basically ran the whole government, and the elected, or the actual government, the head of state and the head of government and so on and so forth, were just apparent government, where the real government was a party. He could do that, or he can declare himself prime minister and then have one of his cronies run for president and then resign and appoint Putin, or even resign and then throw an emergency election, and then Putin could run again, because they're not allowed to run 3 times in a row, but the Constitution of Russia doesn't quite say what happens if there's a gap. Like Chester A. Arthur in the United States, we had one president who was president for 4 years, lost. Another guy was president for 4 years and then won back the presidency the next term. So we don't know whether that, or that really hasn't been challenged in the Russian Constitution. So he's becoming more and more authoritarian, and he's becoming more and more powerful in the world. He's a very, very clever guy, and he's probably going to have influence for the rest of his life. Meanwhile, his best buddy in the world is another authoritarian leader, and that is Hugo Chavez, and there's Venezuela right here. It goes down there and goes over here, and Hugo Chavez has been in power for 10 years. He became president. He had a referendum right after he got elected president. He was elected fairly, and that referendum set up a National Assembly and replaced the Constitution with a Constitution that was written by Hugo Chavez and for Hugo Chavez. And that Constitution said that he can run for 2 terms and then he had to quit. That time is over. He's run his second term, and he's in his second term, and right after he won his second term, he did a bunch of really significant things, took the largest private network and had the government take it over. He was also the biggest soap opera producer in the world, and caused riots actually in Caracas, the capital of Venezuela. Then he took over. He had already taken over the oil industry. He had already consolidated power within the military, but he took over the telephone industry. He took over the another network. Basically consolidated the media, although there are some opposition newspapers that are still in existence. The opposition was basically run out of jobs, a lot of them hounded out of the country. But he has a militia, but he hasn't quite consolidated power, totalitarian power yet. So what he's done is, because he can't run again, and he won a re-election 63%, he felt now's the time for me to move forward and to impose socialism officially on Venezuela. There it is. And once and for all become basically a socialist country in the manner that Cuba is. Basically, he had, I believe, 90 changes to the Constitution he wanted to run. The most important, he was going to be able to run again over and over and over again for life, take over all private property at will, declare national emergency at will, and so on and so forth. And there were also what they call caramellos, which are carrots as well. Caramellos are candies. And he was going to reduce anybody's work to only 6 hours a day. And of course, gas is subsidized, food is subsidized, health care is free. Anything for the people who live in the slums of Caracas, who are Chavistas and vote for Chavez. The bottom line is, because I have 15 seconds left, is that he lost 51-49. The opposition beat him, defeated the reform, so to speak, and now they are not going to have a socialist government. My name is Reed Silverne, and this is Fed Pride.